Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our latest episode of Mycotoxin Matters. Today, we're going to take some time to reflect on some of the key topics that arose at the recent World Mycotoxin Forum. This was the 14th edition of the event and brought together over 420 attendees from across academia, the food and feed industry, policymakers, and government agencies. Held in the beautiful and historical city of Antwerp in Belgium, this was the biggest gathering yet and reflects the growing interest in the area of mycotoxins and food and feed safety. Joining me today to discuss the conference are two of my Alltech colleagues, Dr. Alex Yiannikouris, Research Group Director, and Dr. Vivi, an Aquaculture Technical Specialist. Alex and Vivi, thank you for taking the time for preparing and joining us today.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, Alex, we will start with you if that's okay. Alex, I guess World Mycotoxin Forum, it's always been seen as a means to share the latest mycotoxin-related research, and this year was no different. I think, if I remember correctly, there were a record number of posters presented across the three-day event. Alltech itself had 5 posters on display. To begin, maybe you could just give us an overview of some of the key areas that research was focused on and any of the important findings coming out of that too.
Yes, absolutely, Martin. So indeed, we had a very good representation in terms of posters that we prepared for the event. And actually, I think that we covered quite a bit of various sets of themes actually in the research that we're presenting. One of the first one relates back to what we are doing in terms of biochemistry, trying to understand the functionality of our mycosobe products in order to gain new insight in what this product is doing, especially in the ever-evolving field of mycotoxins. We are always discovering new mycotoxins. They're often called emerging mycotoxins. The emerging mycotoxin types are changing from time to time as we improve on our understanding and how we are characterizing them as emerging. But this is one of the aspects that we wanted to investigate and to provide information on by presenting a poster on the biochemistry of the interaction between our adsorbent product and several of those emerging mycotoxins, such as eniantines, citrinines, etc., pomopsins, for example. So this was a very chemical-based type of approach using methods that are developed in the lab, in vitro methods, connected also to detection techniques such as LC-MS types of system to investigate those adsorption characteristics. Another research that we wanted to put forth is also in vivo research. So we put together also an abstract that collects some of the investigations that we've done in swine and in poultry in order to understand, for example, the pharmacokinetics of aflatoxin B1 in those animal species, in preparation also of testing, also under those conditions, the efficacy of our adsorbent products. That particular poster emphasizes on aflatoxin B1 as well as on some of the metabolites of aflatoxins and how they are accumulating and what is the age related effect of that type of accumulation in the animal, which is something that is really novel. I haven't seen this type of evaluation referenced very much in the literature. A third aspect was the meta-analysis that we recently published in the Journal of Toxins, and that is basically evaluating and taking all the learnings, all the different publication data sets that we have in swine for evaluating the impact of mycotoxins in that particular species, as well as the impact of remediation strategies such as the mycosobe mitigations. And again, using different types of regression and statistical approaches, we were able to evaluate the impact of those toxins on animal performances, and now we can mitigate those effects when we are using an effective adsorbent product. The fourth poster was again on another topic, which is ruminal fermentation. So those ruminal fermentations are often difficult to investigate, especially when we are doing some in vitro evaluations. But with our partnership at our Paradams, we were able also to look at the impact of some penicillium types of toxins on those fermentations and what is the incidence of those, as well as the incidence of our mitigation types of strategy. For the fifth poster, I'm going to let Dr. Koletsi comment on this one because it's her own poster. So she definitely is going to do a better job than me defining and describing it.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, the poster I presented at the World Mycotoxin Forum in Antwerp, it was the last chapter of my PhD thesis. It was a study that we did to evaluate the effect of fusarium-produced mycotoxins on rainbow trout. And there we had a hypothesis that the co-exposure of fusarium toxin would have probably a synergistic effect, but we found that the co-exposure has additive effect. That is still very important for the industry because we know that in the field there are multiple mycotoxins present in the aquafeeds, and that has a very important outcome to know and to be protected and how to protect our trout. So that was the outcome of this poster.
Thank you, Vivi. And I think that gives us maybe a nice intro into my next question, and recognizing that many of our listeners today will be involved in the livestock industry primarily. From an animal perspective, at the conference, what did you find most interesting or novel at this year's edition of the event? I think while talking to you across the few days and even since then, you were particularly interested in some of the salmon work, I think, from Norway, I guess, because of your aquaculture roots. And there was also a presentation that was assessing the viability of biomarkers in diagnosing mycotoxin challenges in the animals. So it will be good to hear, I guess, from an animal perspective, what were some of the most interesting pieces that were shared?
Yes, as a person with a background from the animal science, of course, also we get learnings from the plant science also in this World Mycotoxin Forum. But talking from the animal science and from the research that we saw there, indeed, we have a study from Norway about the effect of emerging mycotoxins in salmon. In our group, as Alex mentioned before, we have a big interest in emerging mycotoxins because are toxins that we don't have more information, are toxins that are currently discovering, and there is no regulation and no guidance limit. And this group from Norway, from the Institute of Marine Research, they investigated the effect of N-Iatin B and beovaricin, as is called BEA, on salmon, and they found that these toxins, they have effect on growth and on health of salmon. And the interesting part was that they performed a risk assessment calculating a safe limit for these toxins in the salmon feed, and they found that the limit for the safe limit for N-Iatin is very problematic because in the reality, in the aqua feeds, we found higher levels of this toxin. So that was a very interesting learning, and indeed, then you mentioned about the biomarkers. It was a presentation from Veronica Nagel from DSM Firmenich, and she presented, and from her presentation, the take-home message was that to make sure to diagnose mycotoxin challenges in our animals is to analyze the feed sample at the moment. This is the most powerful diagnostic tool. That was the take-home message. And of course, there are more studies to talk about animal science. But yes, these are the two that you mentioned. But of course, we have more studies about poultry, about also organoid work. And if we have time, we can talk more during this.
Yeah, potentially. And I think, you've written a pretty comprehensive article as well, Vivi, that's going to touch on some of these topics as well. So we can follow up with that. But at the beginning of your answer there, you mentioned plants. And I guess it's often the starting point for mycotoxin contamination when we think of entering the feed chain. And there was a session dedicated to the interaction, Vivi, of soil, fungi, and plants. I guess although well recognized that soil will harbor many of the mold spores that then leads to subsequent mycotoxin development on plant materials, was there anything new in this session that may better inform how we think about that soil mold and mycotoxin interaction?
Yes, definitely. At least from me, before this conference, I knew that in the soil might be mycotoxins that they are transferred from the rainwater, from contaminated crops in the field, or from animal manure. But from this session, it was a presentation, I think, from Katerina Munoz, that she presented that mycotoxins can also can be synthesized in situ in the soil, and perhaps they have also an ecological role that is not defined yet. And also during her talk, she mentioned that DON might be degraded by microbes that are in the soil. We are not able yet to know exactly which microbes interact with mycotoxins, but this is a lot of work for the future and probably would be a very important tool also for the mitigation strategies that might be available in the future if we have this information.
I think it would be, and I think Dr. Yiannikouris, it was one of your questions when you left that presentation. Well, if Dawn has been degraded in the soil, what is the organism or the action that's actually doing that? Alex, if we do go back to you for the next question, and we'll move to data now, if that's okay. During the ISM debate, in particular on the first day, the challenge of data dissemination across the feed and food chain was cited as one of the biggest barriers to more effective risk management and then policy development alongside that. And also, I think it's fair to say artificial intelligence or AI was probably mentioned in every presentation across the 3 days. I know you will often say it's probably just a fancy term for statistics. But as someone who has gathered and assessed mycotoxin related data for over 20 years, what are your thoughts on how, as an industry, we can adapt better to the opportunities that are presented with these new capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, AI is still front and center. I think that's the second edition of the World Mycotoxin Forum, where we are seeing really several presentations that are really hammering the concept of AI and how it can be useful in our specific field. I think that there is a very tight connection, of course, between data and AI, because AI can indeed provide you with interesting answers as long as you're able to input some data. And the precision on how that data is acquired is of ultimate importance. If your data is not acquired properly, if you're a little bit too lax in terms of how valid that data is, it can also induce some dramatic conclusions using AI that might not be really something that can be actually correlated with anything. I think that the interesting part is in one of the main session is talking about data. There is still a very limited amount of data that is shared to use by those different bodies that are looking at using artificial intelligence. So if we're looking at the entire scientific world that is accumulating data, only 10% is actually landing into the EFSA, for example, for any kind of evaluation, which is a very low number. I think that we are doing on our side a very good job because we are on our side also accumulating a lot of data. We have our 37 plus program. We have our risk assessment that are enabling us to accumulate that type of information. And that's really what we are looking at also using this data for, to try to also come up with some predictive models. Nevertheless, during the conference, there were some interesting information. A lot of groups are working on predictive models to try to bring correlations between what they are seeing in terms of environmental changes, agronomical practices, climate changes, short versus long-term types of events, and what can be the incidence on the production of mycotoxins. A good example was from some of the predictive models that were investigated by Dr. Lina Castano-Duke from USDA, where they were looking at geographical distribution geolocalization versus weather patterns, weather changes also for the accumulation of specific fusarium toxins in corn in the Illinois state in the US. Of course, this is a tiny example. We can imagine that this work will expand on multiple states in the USA as well as in other regions, but it gives us tool to start to understand also those correlations between those events and the mycotoxin production. And that's a nice segue also to the work that we are also participating in when we're looking at predictive models. We have at the moment a consortium effort underway that is managed by the Wageningen Food Safety Research that is leading this type of work, and that is going to investigate in the next 4 years some of those correlations between mycotoxin detected in Europe, geolocalization, satellite imagery, agronomical factors, in order to try to come up with a system that will be an early warning system in order to be able to predictably detect what is a period or a time where we should be aware of a mycotoxin risk, and also to put a warning system where we know when mycotoxins in higher levels are going to be produced. So that's something that is really very interesting in terms of risk assessment and utilization of AI. Other applications, I mean, this is not the only ones. We have now AI that are also looking into the chemical properties of particular compounds. There was a specific emphasis in one of the presentation from Dr. Palimano Schalzheim that developed a QSAR system that is basically taking the chemical parameters of molecules such as mycotoxins, and they're able through AI to model what is the toxicological potential of those particular mycotoxins based on their chemical structures and some of the parameters that are entered in that system. So that's a quite powerful type of system. It enables us to have an understanding, for example, of the potential toxicity of known mycotoxins, but also of newly discovered mycotoxins, or if we are, for example, interested in metabolites of mycotoxins that are not necessarily reported in terms of toxicity, we can use this type of application to evaluate what is their carcinogenic, mutagenic potential. On top of that, actually, we can also do some work and experiments in their system firsthand myself. You can also look at ADME, absorption, distribution, metabolization, and excretion of those different metabolites. You can run some models that can tell you if those compounds can enter into the animal system and what can potentially be also their impact. Another way of using chemical properties is also on the development of mitigation strategies. There was some interesting work presented by Dr. Anransik from India Institute in Spain that has played also with AI in order to understand the absorption efficacy of different types of inorganic binders based on their chemical characteristics, structural functions, and mycotoxins. In addition to absorption experiment, and correlated those composition versus efficacy now can be done through also AI. So that's another potential application in order to work on better system, in order to understand the efficacy, or to build new binders that could be more appropriate for certain categories of mycotoxins. Finally, there is another example of AI that I found interesting, and that's more on the detection side of things. Dr. Pero Gascon from the Center of Excellence in Mycotoxicology and Public Health in Belgium has used what we can consider as AI in order to use an LCMS approach, but to screen a very wide panels of mycotoxins without having to use any standards. So that's an artificial intelligence also generated type of approach, as you're using the tools and the bioinformatic tools that are available in your detection technique in order to use again the parameters of MS detection in order to be able to perform this semi-quantitative or qualitative type of evaluation, and to build also some of those correlation on how good you are in terms of detecting precisely and accurately some of those mycotoxins. So this is potentially also an area that can be developed in the future when we're thinking about screening more types of mycotoxins and having a better understanding of the situation in terms of contamination.
Thank you, Alex. Clearly, lots of opportunities when we think of taking advantage of the wealth of data that is being generated. But I think you said it at the start that the quality of that data and the ability to share it across the wider feed and food chain will probably be, some of the determining factors in terms of how we successfully do take advantage of that. Staying with you, Alex, there's probably not a World Mycotoxins Forum where regulatory guidelines are not debated in some way or another, and this year was no different. Much of this conversation tends to be led by the European Union, and this year, Franz Verstraete, Director General of the European Commission, shared an update on some of the areas that they're currently reviewing, including the potential lowering of guidance levels for certain mycotoxins. And also, I thought an interesting comment, Alex, regarding a potential tiered approach where, to mycotoxin levels, where if nutritional solutions will be included in animal diets, those limits may be set somewhat higher. Would you like to briefly give us some of your thoughts on what Franz shared in Belgium and then what implications it may have for feed and livestock producers?
Indeed, I think that indeed, as you said, I mean, the major moves are coming always from Europe. There are many more crises, I guess, in Europe. They are more vigilant, and there is a rapid alert system in order to understand also the risk that is at stake with the presence of those mycotoxins in terms of impact on animal health and public health too. So there has been from the get-go, I mean, very profound and implementation of rules by Europe. This is an area of the globe where we have some of the strictest regulations and guidelines for mycotoxins. Now, so far, we've been talking about guidelines in many instances for mycotoxins, except for aflatoxin B1 that is strictly regulated in food and feed. But for animal feed, the other mycotoxins were left at a guideline status. And maybe this is something that seems to be evolving in a direction with more enforcement for some of those mycotoxins in order to set permissible limits, strict permissible limits of those types of contaminants. And this is going to be a problem because, of course, mycotoxins are not going to be found at lower levels. We know that we are seeing an increase in the prevalence of those mycotoxins, indeed, due to the fact that we are able to better detect them. But we are also doing far more analysis of those mycotoxins so we can find them far more, and their occurrence is increasing. So if you're putting guidance levels and enforcing them, it's going to again induce some more stress in our industry in order to manage those feeds, those ingredients that are above those regulatory limits now. The other aspect, as you said, is the decrease of, for some particular mycotoxins, deoxynivalenol, for example, or ocatoxin A, of the limits that are going to be recommended or enforced, depending on where we're going with the enforcement side of things. So again, another stress that is going to be placed on the industry in order to come up with feed that has lower levels of contamination or dispose of the feeds that are at higher levels by other means, or displace that to other animals species that are not as well as susceptible as others. I think that we always need to think about indeed health of the animal, which is the role of the regulatory bodies. But on the industry side, we also see that performances of the animals are critical for many of us. So even if there are guidelines and regulation, we know that those mycotoxins at safe levels can induce also an effect on animal industry. That's what we showed also with the meta-analysis that we put forth during this meeting in a poster format, and that we've published, is that even if you're below regulatory limits, you can still see an impact on those performances that might be as grades as with the more acute levels of mycotoxins. So there is a distinction to do. Enforcing level is not going to land us in a situation where it's going to be easier to handle mycotoxins, but we need to be recognizing at the same time that low levels, chronic exposure also can be a significant, can have a significant impact on animal production. Finally, the third areas that was discussed is use of binders and detoxification strategies. And as you said, there might be some consideration within the guidelines framework, within the enforced limit, that a feed that contains a detoxification strategy might be viewed in a different ways than a feed that doesn't comprise a mitigation strategy. Now, what are the rules behind that? What will be the levels of those mycotoxins? I think it will stick into that the actual regulation and the guidelines that are proposed. Maybe there will be a two-tier approach in terms of lower levels of mycotoxins versus higher level of mycotoxin within the regulation if the adsorbent is present in that system. But this is something that has yet to be implemented, established. What are going to be the final rules on that is something that we need to look for and see whether they're going to be coming up as rules for this type of application there.
Yeah, and I think, Alex, like with most of these regulatory changes, there's a lot of dialogue and conversations goes into that before something happens. And I think Franz Verstrade would acknowledge that it's a complex and moving picture when you've got to try consider feed security and protect the health of the animal and the human and all of the other factors that go into that. There's a lot of nuances and that contribute to that before any decisions are made. Maybe to finish up, I'll put a short question to you both. And Alex, you've been a regular at World Mycotoxin Forum events over the past 2 decades or more, potentially. Vivi, I think it's your second event, joining first in Parma last year. To finish, maybe you could both share your final thoughts on, or what would be some of the key takeaways from you from the 2023 edition.
Yes, there is also during this event, there is a tradition that the organizing committee provides the top 5 learned take-home messages that I think we have already included and summarized in the blog that we have. So I'm not going to repeat these ones. So I'll say something more about more personal highlight that I found from the lecture of Professor Chris Elliott, that he talked about food system resilience and how this is disturbed by different facts like climate change, wars, geopolitics. And that reminded me also the theme of Altec 1 in Dublin last June, when Mark Lyons introduced us to the 4 Cs, that it was about climate change, conflict, cost, and consumer. And unfortunately, during this World Mycotoxin Forum, we have the start of another war in the Middle East this time. So this is something that is challenging us, that it seems that we all us we work on the climate crisis, and also there are more crises coming. Yeah, it's something challenging, and we have unforeseen consequences for the planet that makes me more aware and concerned.
Thank you, Vivi, and bonus points for getting a mention in for the WAN conference. Alex, you can give us a brief overview of some of your key takeaways, please.
Yes, I mean, on a lighter tone, going back to the scientific content, I think that Vivi indeed is perfectly right. There are human challenges that are arising that are also affecting the way that we are looking at the overall problematic, and in terms of food scarcity, food security, etc. And there were a lot of presentation during this forum again from African countries that were also giving their own perspective on the mycotoxin mycotoxins and how they can communicate that message also in terms of what is the problem really with mycotoxins, how are the best way to inform people, which are not necessarily the way that we're doing it in a westernized and more industrialized type of countries. So this is an aspect also that that is a theme that is coming back every year at the forum, understanding the perspective of different people from different continents, from Africa, from Asia, on that particular topic of mycotoxin. Now, we cannot forget also about the big themes that have been developed in the last 15 years that mycotoxin conferences have existed. We are still talking about detection of mycotoxins. So we are now going beyond what was taught in the past in terms of rapid detection systems or mass spectrometry. Those are well established, but we are now seeing also some other aspects arising from new methodologies. Will it be in the development of more practical antibodies using mimotopes, new types of techniques? Again, infrared spectroscopy has been mentioned. It is not something that is yet reliable and usable, but there is a great effort and emphasis on these type of things, as well as portable systems. So we're more looking into portable mass spectrometry systems and AI-enabled types of system for detecting mycotoxins. And at the moment, as Vivi mentioned, this is probably the best way of accounting for that risk. Will it be in westernized, industrialized country, or will it be also in Africa, for example? So other learnings, of course, AI, as I mentioned before, very important. But let's not forget about the work that is being done also to try to decipher how mycotoxins are produced. There is a great deal of work that is starting now to understand basically the genome of some of the fungal species that are responsible for the production of certain mycotoxin, and how those genomes are conserved across different regions, across different continents. This is the example, for example, of sporidesmin, that is generally a mycotoxin that is found in New Zealand, but now there is investigation happening in South Africa because we're finding that the genetic sequences, the genome that is responsible for that production, can be found also in species present in other parts of the globe. So it means that maybe that's overlooked type of mycotoxins that can be found in other species. So there is always room for new emerging mycotoxins, new topics to be understood. Another aspect is also toxicology of these toxins. I mean, there was a nice paper presented by Dr. Isabel Oswald showing that maybe some of the mycotoxins that are a precursor to more well-known mycotoxins such as terigmatocystin or aflatoxin B1 can also be a problem and can also have high impact in terms of toxicology. This is the case, for example, or versicolorine A, which is an intermediate that is always present in fungal species producing aflatoxin B1. So let's not disregard also those aspects, some of those new mycotoxins, and now we are evaluating those. Will it be in cell culture systems as well as in some of the new methods that Dr. Santos presented, such as the organoids that are looking more with a view that is closer to the reality on the intestinal system and the impact of both mycotoxins and some of the other pathogens that can be present and what we are exposed to as a whole. Will it be mycotoxins or pathogenic challenge or other types of contaminants? So I will leave it to this. There is a lot of things that we need to think about, and that's why we will have another meeting in a year from now to talk about some of the novel things that are happening in the field of mycotoxins.
That's right, Alex. I think they're set to reconvene in something like April 2025. I think that the location is yet to be confirmed, but that is the current schedule. Well, thank you both for giving us such a great overview of this year's event. I think if our listeners would like some further insights, we will be or have prepared a really comprehensive article that is covering some of the topics that we've discussed today, but also some of those that we didn't get to. We'll hopefully be able to include that in the show notes alongside this podcast. And thank you once again for listening to Mycotoxin Matters, and we look forward to you being with us for the next episode.
We hope you enjoyed listening today and look forward to you joining us next time on the Mycotoxin Matters podcast. For more information on the topics discussed, please visit knowmycotoxins.com. That's KNOW mycotoxins.com.